Hello, everybody out there in UK Clan Bookland. And for the first time today, I believe we're live on YouTube as well at the same time. I'm just going to speak to Helen Fitzgerald about her latest book, Ash Mountain.
Hello.
If you could tell us a bit about the plot, please, to start us off.
Yeah, so Ash Mountain is set in it's sort of a fictional town, but it's sort of where I grew up in Victoria, north of Melbourne in Australia. And it's about a wee town and a woman called Fran who is moving back to the town to care for her father who's just had a stroke. And it's really about a bushfire that hits the town. And what I wanted to write about were the victims' stories. I think, when these incidents happen, you get a few days of hearing about people who were impacted by it, and then it stops and you forget about them. I mean, it's amazing to think that the people who went through the bushfires just, at New Year's Eve time are now going through coronavirus, and they've just had so much hell to deal with. So I wanted to write about who, I made up a set of fictional people in this town, and I wanted to write about their stories just before the fire. What were they doing? What were their lives? What were their stories before this catastrophe hit? And then also, because I repeatedly go back to the day of the fire and show the impact directly that it had on these characters. So it was also to look at the reactions that, why did they end up where they were when the fire hit? What decisions did they make? What did they decide to save? So it's all this sort of, so it's a really different structure from anything I've ever done. And it actually took me ages because it is quite different. It was a sort of disaster movie format that I wanted to write. So although the bushfire is really obviously very important in this book, I could have written an earthquake in northern Tuscany, or I could have written a flood in Scotland. And I was umming and ahhing, about which place and what kind of catastrophe I was going to look at, because those two things were movable, actually. But once I sort of set it in Australia and in a town similar to the one I grew up, it was such a joy to write. And my writing is quite different in this from other books because of that, because I was really drawing on where I grew up. And there's something about the place where you were born, the place where you grew up, that anyway, for me, it's a different experience writing it. The setting becomes much more important. When I've written Australia, the setting has been much more important and much more central to the story. And I think that maybe is because that's where I grew up. That's where I was formed. It has a big impact on you.
How were you influenced by the cover? Because I know that was taken from a photo, I think.
How was I influenced by the what, sorry?
By the cover of the book.
Oh, well, that came after, because I'd written the book and then the fires happened after I'd finished the first draft of the book. And I was supposed to do the copy edits, and I sort of held off when those fires started. And this photograph appeared on my Twitter feed, when I was watching Malakuta and all of the places that were on fire over Christmas and New Year, I mean. So this photo popped up and I said to Karen, oh my God, this would be amazing, and she looked into it and said, oh my God, it is real. It's a guy called Robert Dixon who took it of his daughter Ava in November, when the fires were starting in Port Macquarie, which is in New South Wales. And they were fine, by the way. It looks much worse than it was. The colour of it was just so intense that it makes it look like everything is on fire right in front of her, but it isn't, in fact. It's quite a way away. But yeah, the photograph I think is incredible. Yeah, haunting.
Because there was a quote from him at the end of the book that was also used in the audio book. What made you decide to put that on the end as well?
Oh, I just think he deserved it, and it was such a powerful image that I thought people might be interested. So Karen actually thought of it, Karen Sullivan, the publisher, and asked him, and she might not have wanted to, but he wrote back such a great sort of account of what had happened on that day to him and his family that it was brilliant to put it in.
Yeah, it really did add an impact and a flavour when you were describing that at the end of the book, and how that influenced how you were feeling about the time.
I know. I mean, It's an incredible cover. There are so many, you know, after that photograph, there were so many photographs coming out of Australia that were, you know, equally incredible. You know, that's hard to believe, that photo. It looks like it's been made up. It looks like a horror movie. But there were so many actually that came out. My Australian publisher isn't going to use that photo for the cover, I think, because they were sort of so bombarded with photographs like that over the news while it was happening. So
whereabouts in Australia did you go? Because I've got relatives out there, so I was aware of it too.
really, well, Victoria, so about 60 kilometres north of Melbourne's a little town called Kilmore. When I grew up, it was about 2,000 people, and it was mainly farming and a sort of hinterland of services for the farms. And then later on, it became a bit of a commuters' town. And since I've left, I think those towns that are quite close to Melbourne with a good highway connection, you know, more and more towns are being in between. So it would feel a lot less rural now than when I grew up. When I grew up, you know, from our house, all you saw was the Great Dividing Ranges and there were animals everywhere, and it was a beautiful little rural town with its fair share of issues, but some of which I used for the book, like the Catholic Marist Brothers School that was in Kilmore at the time.
Yeah.
Which, you know, there's a school in Ash Mountain in this story as well. And what it meant for a very small town and for a girl growing up in a very small town was that sort of 1,000 young boys were abandoned there, you know, and it was a real footballing school. So it had a bit of a macho, not woman-friendly feeling. And so it was pretty scary place to grow up, actually, being a girl in Kilmore. So I was drawing on that definitely, and also on the stronghold of the Catholic Church on the town, which, you know, went through its fair share of abuse scandals. So as these colleges often have, you know, all around the world. So, yeah, I was wanting to write about that and the fact that a school like that can actually have an effect of a real cycle of abuse that, you know, it was like the priests and brothers were abusing some of the boys, and then the boys went on to be quite abusive to the girls in town. You know, it just was this vicious cycle of abuse. And that's how when I look back on that town, I think that, you know, that was definitely present. It didn't feel like a safe place, particularly for a girl growing up. Probably not for a boy either.
Your books have been in all over the UK as well. So what it was like, Craig Siston was asking, what was it like to go back and write in Australia after you'd written in the UK for so many years?
Absolutely wonderful. Like I was saying, there's it's weird because I've lived in Scotland for longer now. I've been here for 30 years, but I don't feel I have the sort of authority to write about Glasgow the way that someone's been here forever has, in a way. And I think that's reflected in, you know, how much I'm seen as a Scottish writer too. I think me writing Ash Mountain makes me very much an Australian writer. I've been a little bit sort of in between countries, but I like writing about Glasgow, but the setting, I'm not as confident about the setting, weirdly, as I am about Australia. And the thing is, I haven't been back there for ages, but the landscape of Australia is really in me, and the vastness and hugeness of it, and the you know, and I think looking at it now from a period of years of being away and the distance that I'm at, that distance makes me much more interested in it probably than if I was just living there taking it for granted, which is probably a bit like what I'm like here, if that makes sense. So
Yeah,
about both, but at the moment I'm stuck on Australia, and the next one is Australia, and after that I'll probably go back to Glasgow again. But yeah, I'm really enjoying writing about Australia at the moment.
How do you feel it was depicted in The Cry when BBC did the adaptation?
Oh, I think they did a great job. I tell you, I was dying for the second episode though, because you know, that stuff they started in the first one was winter in Glasgow, and I remember having a young baby at winter in Glasgow and the feeling of depression so I was dying for them to get into, you know, some Australian sky in the show, and they had a really nice mix of those two things. I think they did an incredible colour with the colour and the texture, and it was almost you could almost smell the fire and the eucalyptus that they were talking about, you know, as they were driving through. Glendon Ivan, who's the director, did an incredible job. And the Sammy Chippy, I think is his name. He's the cinematographer. I thought they were brilliant. I thought they did a beautiful job for both cities, actually.
Yeah, that's how I first became aware of your books with that.
Yeah, The Cry was really good. Oh, there are people saying questions over there. Hello, hello, people.
Um, what was it like when you first got nominated for the shortlist this year for Theakston's?
Oh, so I was so shocked because the long list was so strong, wasn't it? I mean, all of the
Yeah,
books on there, I was like, oh my God, The Whisper Man and Nothing Important Happened Today, and, really Denise Miner, and I'm going to forget all the Mark Billingham, great, great writers. So I was astonished to be on the long list. And also, I thought that I thought the worst case scenario must have been eligible last year, actually, and that it didn't get longlisted. So I had completely forgotten about it when I got longlisted. And then when I got shortlisted, I'm like, whoa, that was really nice. I have to say, someone who's never won any prizes, I'm always like, oh, who cares about prizes? But, when you get something like that, it does really boost you. It was great.
yeah. When I read that, it was so funny the way you depicted the story. Um, yeah, such a unique way of depicting it.
Worst case scenario, that
Yeah,
was that was so much fun to write. I never thought anyone would publish that. That went out, so I was moving publishers when I wrote it. I knew I was going to be looking for a new publisher because my editor had left Faber, and I knew that The Cry as well was coming out. So I had a year where I found out that The Cry was coming out, and I was publisherless. So I thought, and I had written half of a book which was kind of much more bog standard domestic noir, and I thought, no, I don't. If I do, when The Cry comes out, people are going to want me to write the same book again and again, like my new publisher. I knew I wanted to write something that was quite different and quite challenging, and attract a publisher that I knew that was willing to let me do stuff like that, and wasn't going to just say, "Radio, can you please do The Cry 2, The Cry 3, The Cry 4?" So I did it, and my agent sent it out to 21 publishers, and no, everyone hated it. 20 rejections. Karen Sullivan got back, the only one. Oh, I love this. This is amazing. Like, it was such a different response to 20 other publishers. So thank God for Karen.
were you influenced by your work life job when you wrote that?
Oh,
Or
very much so, because I was actually in the job when how I said I'd started a book. I was in the job when I did that, and I wrote The Cry and a couple of other books while I was working too. And I never felt like I could write about the job. I've always been looking for a potential series, and for that you need a good story engine and a good precinct. And I always knew that I had that at my disposal, but that I couldn't be working in the job and write it as well. So I was working in the job when I started that other one, and it was because The Cry got greenlit and I left my job. I thought, righty, I'm going to go for it now. I can write the one, and because I really wanted to explore and sort of make it clear what that job is, because people were always saying, what do you actually do? And I think with Mary, I showed the sort of procedures and exactly what she is doing, supervising parole and probation licenses. But as I said, I couldn't have done that unless I'd left, and I couldn't have done it unless I'd worked in that job, because it was all very fresh and very real to me, the job. Yeah.
it was very accurate from what I got from my training, because I did voluntary training with the framework in Nottingham, and they were going to go into prisons and work with prisoners.
Oh,
So I did
wow.
a little bit about it, and it was very accurate with the stories you shared. What made you go for the mini stories in the book?
I was, I guess I'm always sort of challenging some of my own issues in books a bit, and I found that as I was working at the end of that job, I was working primarily with men, and it was primarily domestic abuse. And I was, sort of in charge of supervising and helping and trying to work through with men their issues around being abusive towards their partners or ex-partners. And as I got a little bit more and more hormonal with menopause, I got less able to do that. I became angry, I suppose. And so that anger I think is what I've given to Mary, you know, tenfold from what I found that sort of like her professionalism breaking down. That's what I was kind of looking at in that in the book, really, was that there's such a difficult job that if you're not completely with it and feeling well, you know, mentally and everything, you're going to mess up big time, and that's what happens with Mary.
Yeah. What made you differentiate that between Hot Flush? Because the themes are similar.
Well, it's funny I wrote that because I didn't know anything about menopause at the time, but it's a really similar character. Well, she's a different kind of character. She's much more sort of straight-laced and housewifey, isn't she? But I feel like I've been practicing Mary in a lot of my books. You know, Dead Lovely, the very first one, is a social worker called Chrissy Donald, and I was going to make her the character for Worst Case Scenario because she's the same. She's 20 years on, she would be the right age, and she, you know, she basically is Mary. But I thought, no, I can't have all the baggage that Chrissy has from that first and second book. She had 2 books. So I made a different character, but she's, you know, it's always a bit of a psycho woman in social work. So, yeah, write what you know.
Yeah. What was it like writing a male character? Because you've done that once in that.
With Liam, yeah, I always feel like, because I had him writing letters in the book, and I felt with like Alistair in The Cry too that I didn't give these guys a point of view actually, and I think it would have. I mean, because Alistair was the baddie, you know, and I had meant with him and also with Liam in Worst Case Scenario to make them nicer and much more. And I tried, but the truth is I just hate those guys. So I was not able to do it. Yes, but every time I've got a baddie, I'm like, he's not a baddie, he's just done a bad thing, and you need to write a whole person and try and make him someone who you could actually understand, but I don't manage it.
Yeah, I think you do need a rounded body. What tips would you say for someone that's trying to write a rounded body?
Sorry?
What tips would you say was for someone that was trying to
Oh,
write
well, so
rounded
I
body?
don't know if my baddies work, right? But I always think of the person who at the moment I like the most. So it's usually my husband because he's great. And I imagine that he is him until you get to the bad part. And I also I trick myself. I tell myself he might not be the baddie. I might change my mind and it might not be him after all. You know, I did that with Alistair the whole way through the book. I tell myself, okay, yeah, fair enough, but you might not do that. You might not do that. So he might turn out, you might turn out to want to defend him. So I always trick yourself. I think, that works for me.
When you've got multiple characters like that you could have chosen for the main character in the book, what made you go for the ones you did?
Like Fran in Ash Mountain versus going for Rosie. Well, I was initially going to make it Rosie as the main character, and in Worst Case Scenario, when I wrote that first half of the book, it was Holly who was the main character. And what happened in both cases was that I was writing away and I've done a whole lot, and then I wrote a scene, for example, with Worst Case Scenario, I wrote a scene. She hadn't appeared yet, 40,000 words in, and she comes into the book and she's got a bag full of complaint forms and starts talking about her ovaries in this home visit. And I thought, oh, no, it's got to be all Mary. And I just chucked all the rest out and stuck with her. And with Fran, I think I relate to Fran. I've been home to care for my dad before he died in Australia, and my mum has just gone into a care home. And I relate to that sort of age group of when your parents are ill, and also being a girl who grew up in a town like that, because that's very central to the story, what happens with the church and the school and everything, and what happened when she was a teenager.
What was it like writing the father character in Ash Mountain?
The final chapters were actually, the most incredible experience I've ever had in my life. I had about a day. I knew it was coming, and I hadn't worked out who was going to live and who was going to die yet. And so I wrote, and I had placed I had a big map on my wall, of Ash Mountain. I knew that the fire went through this one strip, so it depended who ended up in that strip in the town at that very moment. And, I was working up to this moment, and I was getting there, and then I'm like, okay, I know everybody is in place. It's 3:30, it's the day of the fire. So I wrote all of their names on a little piece of thingy and put them in a bowl which I call the death bowl. And my daughter filmed me picking them out, and I'm picking them out and I'm going, no, you can't. So basically, some of the things I picked out I stuck with, but mainly I didn't. I realised that as a writer, you can't be random like that, you know.
Yeah.
So once I'd done it, though, I knew who was going to live and die, and I sat down and wrote it. And I remember coming down, and it was almost a bit like a game of Cluedo. You know, it's Gramps with the wheelchair and the ostrich in the ostrich farm, and such with the such and such in it. And I would write that little segment, and I've never had such euphoria of writing before in my life. And I came down after finishing it, the book, and said to Seth, I've just had an experience. I think I've just had like an experience. I think I was just tired, but it was so amazing to write. I've never experienced anything like that. And I think I'd put a lot of work into making sure that I was going to be able to do that, you know, that everything was in place and that it was just going to be, you know, now you're in the bunker, now you're in the water tank or whatever.
What was it like editing for clues in that? Because you got different stories running at the same time.
Yeah, I'm getting better at it. I think because I've done 10 books now, I'm getting better at making sure continuity is a pain in the ass. And now I know from, you know, day one, there are decisions that I have to make before I put pen to paper that I didn't used to do. And one of those is that you have to know the time frame exactly. It's from Saturday at 3 o'clock on this date till that date. And, you know, because see at the end of a draft when you realise that you've got all your times wrong, actually, it's the worst thing. I hate that. It's hard to unpick. You know, it can be really hard. So I'm constantly, I think now, hearing my editor in my ear asking me the questions that I know they're going to ask me eventually anyway. And I think that made it easier for Karen in terms of the editing. Unless, you know, you might have found some holes. You tell me you probably have.
No, it was fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
What made you decide to do it in such a short timeline? Because I saw that as really beneficial.
The short timeline I did is really, I don't know why, but for worst case scenario and this one, I felt like they were both sort of a roller coaster of, you know, leading up to a big event. And I did both of them 11 days because it gives you 2 weekends in a week. And I followed, they were both stories that I followed very closely, very intimately every hour of every day, really. So having 1 week and 2 weekends, it kind of gives you two big, the weekends always is when the action happens. And during the week, you know, it just worked for me as a format. But I was thinking, I can't do that again. I can't do 11 days every book. It was easier and it just felt right. But this next one, I'll probably have a longer timeline, but maybe not.
What made you go for the longer timeline in other books versus the short one in those?
Well, let me think. I'm trying to think what sort of timelines I've had in other books. I think I usually have quite short timelines. The Cry was quite short, but the TV show, they lengthened it a lot. And it makes me realise that I do maybe always, I rush past what I think is the boring bit. But yeah, I think that was quite short too, because I had Joanna, you know, doing the final what happens at the end, really just a week after what you know, the incident with the baby. So hard not to get spoilers. So that was also a short timeline, and I think I always felt like The Cry was my best book that kind of came together the best, you know. So I was using things that I knew worked for that, made it easier for me for this one.
Yeah. What would you say was your most emotional one to write? Your most emotional book?
Ash Mountain and Dead Lovely, my first one. Yeah. I mean, I cried a lot with both of those. I cried my eyes out when I wrote those fire scenes. I couldn't believe what I was doing, you know, to these poor people. But yeah, probably those two. The first one was very emotional because it was just so incredible doing it after all those years of thinking about trying to write a book and reaching the end was wow. Yeah, that was a great feeling. And then you have to go through the can I do it again and can I do it again and
What was your first influence as a writer? What made you decide to write?
My mum would be the first. She was an English teacher at the college I was talking about. So she was up against it teaching footballers, but she taught some. She was a brilliant English teacher. Really, the kids who were taught by her will all talk about her. She didn't believe in teaching actually English. She, books should be enjoyed. She didn't like the academic aspect of it really, and she was always reading and talking about poetry, and there were plenty of books in the house all over the place. And my dad, language was the thing that we played with as a family, big on jokes and big on puns, and whoever could be clever with words was doing well in the family. So my influence was mainly mum, but growing up in what is probably a very they read a lot. My family read a lot and were very interested in literature.
Who would you say was your biggest writer influence then?
My biggest writer influence is a little one, as a tiny little kid, Enid Blyton, Magic Faraway Tree. I would say Stephen King is a really big influence. I've always been really interested in things that transfer well as adaptations, even from very young. I've liked to watch movies and TV that are adapted from books. And Stephen King, oh my God, amazing. Story after story after story, idea after idea. And Ash Mountain, I was very thinking about Stephen King in terms of the small town environment, the sort of intimacy of it, and every man and every woman, just very relatable characters who you get to know so well before the shit hits the fan.
What would you say is the biggest difference between writing for TV and writing the book?
I don't write for TV at the moment. I've tried to in the past, but my husband does. It's a really different side of the part of the brain. Actually, it is quite a different thing. I've realised that I find it a lot harder to write screenplays than I do prose, and I really like writing dialogue. But I like writing dialogue and working it together with the prose. So, it's like there's the rhythm of it, and as a piece I like. And when you're writing screenplays, it's just the dialogue. The main thing I find hard about screenwriting is that you're not doing it on your own. And there are people who work well on their own, and there are people who work well in teams. I would find a writer's room going through, my story of 6 of us on a Zoom for 10 hours a day, drinking coffee and eating donuts. That would do my head in. I think I'm used to working on my own. So that is actually the main thing. It's the number of meetings that you have, and the fact that, you're writing a story that a lot of other people have a say in as well.
What would you say is the other books that you'd want to adapt for TV?
I think Worst Case Scenario is the one that I can just see, and I think I was writing it thinking about TV the whole time. I was definitely thinking when I decided to do it that this would be the first time I've got something that would be a returning possibility for TV, that it's a story engine and a precinct that could work over and over and over. So I was thinking about TV when I wrote Worst Case Scenario. I think I'm always most fond of my most recent books, and I hate the ones before then. So at the moment, I would say Ash Mountain as well. I think that would be powerful. I don't know how they would do it, but yeah.
So when you finish your book, how long would you say that is before you leave it behind?
So I finish a book when ideas, I reach the end, but also my brain has stopped thinking, what if she does that and she should go, oh, you should do that and this, and how about you add this? Your brain's constantly going like that when you're writing a book. And I've stopped when that stops. And when that stops, I'm immediately over it. So, Ash Mountain is probably the day I wrote it, I was over it. And I've since just been I was deliberately trying not to have any ideas, not do any writing, just to flush my brain out. And but I couldn't stop myself. I've started another one. So we're in it again.
Yeah. Is that why you'd say that you've not written many books in series?
I think the reason I've not written many books in series is because I get bored, and even though I'm saying Mary, she'd make a great returning, I don't know if I want to write it yet. And, maybe a TV writer could do the rest for me, at a TV show. And I also, I get bored. I mainly, though, I think that it depends on how much you put your character through. And if you put your character through too much, and also if that's what made the book good, then you're not going to be able to repeat that. I tend to do really quite big stories, big things happen to these people. So they can't happen over and over again, except with Mary now, because actually it was just the job that really happened with her. And that can keep on happening.
What would you say is your favourite minor character that you've written, do you think?
My favourite minor character, there are lots in Ash Mountain. Oh, I'd say worst case scenario, there's a John Paul character, and I loved him. I was very fond of him. He's called John Paul the Ned, and he's one of Mary's clients, and he's a young offender. And that age group of offenders, sort of 18 to 24, I had quite a lot of them when I was supervising, when I was doing the criminal justice social work. And I liked working with that group of young men. There's a very good chance that they're going to not stop what they're doing. I think that's the main thing. There was some hope in it. When you get a sort of a 40-year-old sex offender, it's a different story. So it was a nice group of people to work with. And John Paul, they were funny. They always had really funny and interesting stories to tell. Really great gift with words. And John Paul, who's in worst case scenario, was like that.
I was just, if you can see any audience questions.
Yes, I've been trying to look because I'm so blind. Right, I'm going to look in here. Okay. Hello, Caroline and Samantha. Difficult to write such powerful, intense. Is it difficult to write such powerful and intense subjects? Yeah, actually, I've always thought, oh, of course it's not. It's fine. I can do that. And even when I was doing the job, I thought, oh no, I can manage this. It's people would be like, isn't that really heavy? And I'd be like, no. But actually, I'm starting to realise that, it is really hard. I think that, you do take your mind to a dark place. My sister was looking on my YouTube searching the other day, and it was all about Marist Brothers Catholic Church and, sex scandals and all really negative, difficult, awful, yucky, hard to deal with subjects. And, with all of the books, I'm spending a lot of time delving into those things. With the one I'm just starting, I've decided to try and start with a subject that's a little bit happier, even though it's going to turn to hell, obviously, but just the world is a little bit nicer so that it can sort of offset. I think like in The Cry, I always try to have some relief. And in The Cry, I had Alexandra, who was the ex-wife. And in the book, actually, she had a much bigger role and she was funny. And that sort of gave you some relief from that awfulness of what Joanna was going through. So good question. Yeah, I do find it hard, but I seem to find it impossible to not do it. So what's the next question? What are your most memorable moments as an author so far? Oh, let me think. There's a funny moment where years ago, when I had my first book out and it came out in Italian, it was called Cattivi Pensieri. I went to a bookshop and my kids were about 10 and 7 at the time, very cute and very loving, and they thought I was amazing and wonderful at that age, they do. So anyway, we're in this beautiful bookshop in Lucca because we're on holiday there, and the kids are at the cafe and they said, go and ask her if they've got your book. And I'd already been through the agonising process of going to a bookstore and asking if they had my book, and the time before that, someone had taken me up to the top floor and then got a ladder and gone up to the top step and brought down a dusty book and given it to me. And I was so embarrassed that I bought it, So this time I went up to the woman and I said, I'm Helen Fitzgerald. Have you got, just wondering if you've got a copy of my book? And she's like, oh my God. And she said, just wait a minute. She didn't speak English, just like, the memento. And she went and got 6 other staff members and they came over excitedly and my kids are waving at me from the cafe and they sat around me, and this woman who I'd spoken to said, everybody, this is Helen Fielding. So and I looked at my kids and I said, pleased to meet you. The kids, we've got to go. That's probably one of my most memorable moments. God, there's actually been a lot. See the festivals and the nights in Harrogate. There's one night I'll never forget, 3 a.m, absolutely drunk, and saying, I've got an idea, and crawling upstairs to my room there and writing an eyeliner on a piece of tissue, the first paragraph of Viral. And then, going back downstairs and continuing drinking as I did when I was a young, 3 years ago person. And it's amazing. The next day I wake up and I see this, first paragraph of.
The Helen's screen just appears to have popped off at the moment. Hopefully, Caroline will be able to get back in a second. Last night I was watching two crime writers and microphone talk about Theakston's, and they were telling us about how Luca was always making a joke and worried about how he was going to appear on stage. So hopefully if we get Helen back, I can ask her about her first experience in the audience there. Could you send them a message and tell them we've got a problem, because it's... here we go.
I don't know what happened there.
Yeah. I was just telling the guys about how to get experiences that I've heard about on the festival circuit. What would you say is your first audience experience?
Oh, let me think. My first audience experience, I had a couple of really awful ones, like the big theatre in my local area. They booked out and 4 people came and I knew them all. So yeah, that's everybody's been through that. I think it's hard to get audiences for these things, but that was pretty mortifying, and I had a few of those.
What's been your best festival experience?
So it's bloody Scotland last year, because I hadn't really gone and stayed the weekend until the last few years, and I have to say I loved that. I loved the atmosphere up there. It's really nice. It just seems to be a lot of creativity, not just writing going on all around you, the music, and everybody's doing stuff, and it's a beautiful little town, and just so very Scottish when you've got the pipers and the fire things coming down the hill. And because I live here as well, it's been great to see that festival going from strength to strength. But my most drunken moments and my most outrageous times were probably in the early days for me in Crime Fest, and making great friends, and feeling like you've got colleagues, and So hard to pick one. I can't think of something that particularly happened right now, or that I could say out loud anyway.
That's always the best thing, though, isn't it? Yeah. The stories you can hide or talk about in a bar when no one's around.
Yeah, it's the bar environment in those festivals too, which is so fun. It's just it's lovely.
What would you say your festival tip on is when you're at a bar?
When you're at the bar?
Yeah.
Don't buy a drink for anyone else. Don't get around, especially in Crime Fest in those last years. It was just £100 or something.
Oh.
And if you get into rounds, don't get in. I mean, it's one of those environments, and also I think there's an etiquette about it's okay to move on from a group that you're talking to. People sort of move around. It's an unusual environment, but don't get stuck talking to someone you're bored with. Move on.
What would you say that your favourite thing about going to Theakston's is?
I mean, even just the train trip down. You always end up sitting one time I was sitting with Willie McElvany, and I was with my sister, and she didn't have a clue who he was. And she's like, "Oh, so do you write too, Willie?" And he was so sweet. And then last year I ended up sitting with Denise Miner. And so even just the sort of going there is nice. The little train that goes from York to Harrogate and turning up in that beautiful flowery town. I don't know. Yeah, everything about it. It's but just to get those audiences as well. I mean, it's amazing how many people go and to have so many readers. So sometimes these events can feel like it's writers just talking to each other. And what I really like is it's readers, and what a lovely bunch of people to talk to and get a chance to talk to.
What would you say is the biggest thing you've missed in lockdown because most festivals are closed?
Probably just sitting in because the festivals are closed. Well, everything. It's a bit of a shame. This year I was shortlisted for the worst case scenario, and I've got this book coming out. So it would have been a high, and it punctuates the year. I've been in my room writing and on my own, and then you have that sort of spurt of activity, and you need it as a writer. Otherwise, you don't see anyone ever. So it's missing what punctuates the year for me socially. I mean, it's the only time I think about my wardrobe and get a decent haircut and stuff, going to Harrogate, going to one of the festivals. It's a wonderful way to punctuate the year. We're really lucky to have that.
Yeah. I've still not had a haircut myself. When did you manage to get out and have a haircut?
And have a what?
Haircut. I've still not been
Oh,
and
no,
had one.
actually, my husband cut this, so I still haven't. And I still haven't had the decent haircut.
So what's it been like with the family up there?
Oh, it's been good because I've got a 20-year-old and a 23-year-old. So the 20-year-old was doing exams and everything from home for the initial period. So he had a purpose and was busy. And my older girl has been working, and she's been out most days. So we've had a time that we never thought we'd have again, because they have left home. We were kind of ready for empty nest, and we never thought, and we're beyond that, going on holidays together. Everyone's always doing different things. So we're sort of forced back into this domestic lifestyle, which we haven't had for quite a long time. And I have to say, it's been lovely. It's been really lovely. My son started cooking really great meals, and my daughter's been amazing and doing, we've been gardening, which we're getting into. So for us so far, it's we've had a good time so far.
How has it affected your writing? Have you been able to write?
Well, I was having a break anyway, so I haven't been trying very hard, but I have got a kind of 3-page idea for the next book, and I've started putting sticky labels up all over my wall next door. So but I haven't yet decided. Rightio, now I'm sitting down and writing it, and I'm using all sorts of sort of justifications to watch a lot of television as if it's research. So anything to do with Australia at the moment, that's I can watch that because that's what I'm writing about. But yeah, I'm doing some procrastinating. My son goes back to uni. He's going to his flat in St Andrews soon, and my daughter will be, driving before you know it. So I'll get back into it as soon as that happens, but I haven't been in a hurry. I wanted to kind of have a couple of months between. Usually it would have been to do the festivals and everything, but gardening instead. There's a few questions here I've missed. Just have a look. Most memorable moments as an author so far. I did. Thank you very much, Samantha Kelly. You're a new author to me. Which would you suggest reading first? I always like my most recent ones best. So I would say Ash Mountain, Worst Case Scenario, or The Cry. I think they're the best, probably the best books. The Worst Case Scenario and Ash Mountain have got more humour in them, but they're all similar tone, I would say. What did you do as a job? I was a criminal justice social worker in Scotland. That's what we're called. In England, it would be, a probation officer in the probation service, if that's still what it's called. So I was supervising offenders. I'd have if you were full-time, you'd have about 30 cases, people on parole and probation who you were keeping an eye on for the court and breaching if they got up to no good. So that's informed a lot of my stories. Would I write in other genres? I absolutely would write in comedy. I've written young adult, a couple of young adult books. and I would also like horror. But I think at the centre of all my books is family drama. It's family drama, usually with a thriller thrown in. But I reckon I could throw a horror in. And in Ash Mountain, it's a disaster that I've put in. So welcome back, Samantha said. Thank you very much. Is it hard being away from the family for work, or just a whirlwind that keeps you busy? Well, my family are all here, actually. Other authors I wait for new books from. I'm always waiting for a new book from, thanks, Samantha, from Doug Johnson. And he's just, I think, finished his third one of the Skelfs series of the private investigator set in Edinburgh in a funeral home. And talk about story engine and great writing. And yeah, there's 3 of these books, and the last one's called Big Chill, I think. Or that second one. Anyway, Doug Johnson, I read all of his books. He's great. And Will Carver, if anybody has read any of his, Nothing Important Happened Today, and recently Hinton Hollow Death Trip. He's just got the most incredibly original voice. I've never read anything like it, and I love him. I'm a little bit obsessed. I think he's like, wow. So Will Carver, yeah, grab a copy of his.
What would you say your darkest character is that might well be similar to Will's?
Maybe I might give it away a bit, but in Ash Mountain, Father Frank, yeah, and yeah, no, I think Will's takes the cake. He wins. He wins. So mine are ordinary people, usually who you can imagine that if certain circumstances happened, maybe it could be anyone who did what they did, you know. In worst case scenario, there's a character called Jimmy McKinley, an elderly sex offender, and yeah, he was abhorrent to write. So yeah, dark characters are fun, aren't they?
Yeah. What would you say is most appealing about writing YA?
Writing about dark characters, I suppose. You allow yourself to go places that, you know, that you wouldn't. It's also it's fun, and it gives an opportunity for your main character, who usually hasn't done the bad things, to get some sort of revenge. You know, it's about the reaction, I suppose, as well as the action of the person. I don't know if that makes sense. I like writing baddies. I do. But, you know, I worked with people who've done bad things, I should say, rather than just baddies. That just really interests me. You know, what happened, what is different about this person that means that they have committed this act, and, you know, and another person wouldn't have.
Yeah. What was it that made you originally decide to work in probation?
I found it really hard trying to decide on a job. I remember I did an arts degree, so you come out of that for a start thinking, what the hell am I supposed to do with my life now? And I'd done English, and I never thought that writing was potentially a job. I hadn't grown up with expectations like that. You know, I thought maybe I didn't know what I wanted to do. I can't remember what you asked exactly there. Sorry, lost my train of thought.
I asked you what made you decide to work in probation?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I couldn't think of anything else that interested me. Like, it really fascinated me. Crime always did. I was always interested. There was a fair amount of crime where I grew up. So I was interested in people's bad deeds, you know, and it had sort of, you know, that town experience of knowing everybody so well that you knew people's stories and you knew people who had done things. And I was just always interested. I don't know why, in an empathetic way. You know, what is it about you that you've done this? So I was, from a young age, interested in social work. And when I was over in Scotland at the time when I finished my first degree and realised I had to do something to get a job. And I got a job in a hostel in Edinburgh, which was like a halfway house for high-risk parolees. So I was living in a house with those 7 offenders, very high-risk offenders, who had to live there for a year after they came out of jail. So that job was kind of just a bit of a fluke, really. But getting that job gave me it was a terrifying job, terrifying. And but it gave me the interest, and it got me into social work. And once I was in social work, you can choose whether you're going to work with children, offenders, elderly, adult services. So I chose and specialised in criminal justice.
How long after you specialised did you decide that you'd go into writing about it?
20 years. I was always sort of, writing little bits and pieces, but nothing that made any sense or that went anywhere. I only started writing. I started writing screenplays 20 years ago, and started trying to write books 15 years. So it was a long period where I didn't write at all. I only started when I was 40. So it was never too late.
That's good to hear. I think a lot
Look at these questions. I feel bad. Someone was asking, when I go to Harrogate, is it hard being away from the family? Oh no, it's fantastic being away from the family, and it's so great having excuses to go away to these things just yourself. Because actually, you don't get that chance often, and it's my thing. And I mean, my husband comes sometimes, and he loves it too. But I really like going on my own, and I would say to anybody, writer or reader or blogger or whatever, don't be scared to go to these things on your own, because most people do. It is just them, and that's, I think, what's nice about it. Anybody could just turn up, So
yeah. I've been
right about the lockdown. I think Samantha is, Caroline is asking. I mean, I think it's a bit like asking, would you ever write about cancer, after cancer became a thing, it's like, I think it's going to be a part of life. I have the story I'm writing about. I'm not writing about lockdown, but it's sort of, there'll be elements of what the effect has been on my characters of COVID. A 72-year-old woman, her husband has died, she's left with no money. So I'm writing about it in a tangential way, but I don't think we should worry about that too much. We might find that just before you know it, all your characters have got masks on. Maybe it'll be mask noir, but it probably won't change the stories too much. It's a bit like the mobile phones. Or how are we going to write a thriller when we've got mobile phones? Well, you can. But no, I'm not planning on writing anything particularly about lockdown. Now's has been pretty uneventful. It's been pretty similar to real life for us. We've been very lucky in that respect, and privileged and all of that.
What would you say that you've used for technology? Because technology was used a lot in Ash Mountain.
Yeah. So what would I use for technology in my next book?
Yeah.
Oh, so I'm already thinking about that, because I thought, okay, my 72-year-old woman, I'm going to make it so she just always goes where there is Wi-Fi, and she's always got Wi-Fi, and she's always got a phone, and if ever she needs it, she can use all of it. I think that's the simplest way. I think if you try and hang a plot point on the technology, it's not going to be great. But no, I haven't really thought about it very much. But I thought if it was me, or if it was my mother-in-law, I was thinking because my woman heads off in a van to travel around Australia for the rest of her life until she dies. And if it was me, I would be up on the internet. I wouldn't go without having all of that stuff to, keep me safe. So I'm just I try to do what I think is believable. Would I do that? Would I go off in a van around Australia without having a mobile phone and a charger and backup plans and all of that? So.
What would you think you'd end up writing about rural Australia versus city?
Well, I haven't actually written about city, so maybe I think I need to go back there again before I do. Yeah, I feel a little out of touch. I think Melbourne has changed a lot, and I haven't been back for 5 years now. So before I embark on something like that, I'd want to go back. Although the character I've got, she starts off in Adelaide, and so what I do when I can't be in a place or go to a place is I spend an awful lot of time on Google Earth, just walking around the streets and seeing, what the lay of the land is like in that place. And also I spend a lot of time on Rightmove, pretending I'm buying the right house that my character would live in. So I think it's all procrastination, really. But it does give me a feel of, okay, that's the house, that's the suburb, that's the street, So maybe I will write about Melbourne City, but no, I don't feel confident about doing that at the moment.
What would you say is the hardest thing you've ever had to research?
It's probably been when it's been about places that I don't know, because it makes me a little uneasy writing about places that I haven't been to. And there was a young adult book I wrote called Deviant that I set in Los Angeles. Well, initially it was supposed to be Australia, but those are the days when I was told, no, it must be America or London, preferably, maybe Glasgow. Just don't give them accents, you know. So Deviant, I wrote, was a young adult book, and my editor wanted me to set it in Los Angeles. And I said, I've never been there. And he said, oh, you really don't need to, Helen. It's just like, but I found it hard because I hadn't actually, and I didn't know it at all, you know. So I just knew, I mean, you see a lot about LA on the telly, obviously, but I didn't have a feeling about it.
Do you use audiobooks at all?
Yeah, so I've been reading over lockdown, listening over lockdown rather than reading, and loving it because you can potter around too. It's such a nice thing. And also, especially in the first couple of weeks of lockdown, I was really scared. I think most people were. And it just was very relaxing, and it got me to sleep at night, which is why there are certain sections of books I can't remember, because I do find it so relaxing that I fall asleep. But I know I really love audiobooks. And if you get a reader I found the ones that when I've read one that from authors who I know, that they sound like the author, and when they sound like the author, I like it. You know, there's something about the actual voice of the author. I think someone like that was Vanda Simon, Overkill. Her narrator just sounds exactly like Vanda. And Auntie, I can't say Auntie's last name, Little Siberia. It's like listening to Auntie. So, yeah, I love listening to audiobooks. I'm really into it, actually. Find it easier.
What would you say is your best author recommendation, say?
My author recommendation at the moment would be Will Carver. I think he's going to be huge, or already is huge, and I just think I really like books that bring something new that never been done before. You know, that's what always excites me when I'm like, whoa, well done. That's like, you've really, you know, done something different, added something new, bent the genre, you know, gone to places that no one else has. The voice is so strong, and that's what he does. To me, he's like a pal. So I would highly recommend Will Carver.
Have you read any Australian authors recently that you'd recommend?
Jane Harper, The Dry, and I'm drawing a blank now, but I didn't read all of Michael Robotham. Is it Robotham or there's another way of pronouncing
it? Robotham, I think, yeah.
It is Robotham, yes. But mainly, yeah, Jane Harper's The Dry. Have you read that?
I have, yes. It was a very good book.
Yeah, really good. Yeah, there's tons. I've got to catch up. Australian crime fiction I haven't had enough of it. I need to read lots. And there's tons of books in Craig Sisterson's recommendations in his Southern Cross Crime. I read that and I was like, I stopped writing names down because there were so many authors that I wanted to read that he mentioned in that.
Yeah, over 300. Amazing how much research.
He knows everything. He knows everything.
Thanks so much, Helen. It's been great talking.
Oh, thank you so much. Samantha's asking, just before I go, what advice to somebody writing their first novel? I would recommend that you just go for it. You know, like, don't hold back. Don't be thinking about what other people might think or what the market might think. Give to it what you can give to it, what your take is on it, and just go for it. You know, don't hold back.
What would you say is that you use for your writing technique when you're writing yourself as a tip for writing?
So my way of writing now has changed, and it might not be a great tip, but I do most of the writing in my head before I've written a scene almost word for word before I sit at the computer. And that might not work for other people because I think I work a little visually and I like to see things on the wall. And like I said, I had the map and, you know, I'm always playing around with diagrams and things. But don't write too fast before you know, I see, it depends whether you're a planner or not. And I'm becoming more and more of a planner as I go along. And I need to know everything about I write scene by scene, and I only think about that scene, and I don't think about anything that's coming after. I don't let myself just stay in this one. It's Mary, she's going into the DSS or whatever, you know, and I just stay with that scene and work it out through my head and make notes and walk around the house thinking, okay, that, and then she does that, and then that's there, and then I write it. And actually, well, definitely has made editing easier because I've put a lot of work into populating the whole scene before I write it down.
So do you have notes all over the house?
There are notes all over the house. I've got notebooks everywhere. I've got like flip chart paper on my walls and, yeah, all sorts of things. So I'll probably have to have a map for this one too when she's driving around, doing the big lap of Australia.
What is the newest place you think of using that? Australia.
So I'm thinking of setting it. She lives in Adelaide, and my dad comes from Adelaide, so I've been there a lot. And it's you know, where Adelaide is sort of west of Melbourne on the southern coast. And most people are grey nomads. So it's there are a lot of retirees in Australia now travelling. A lot of homeless people, women actually. I was just watching on the BBC. There's a new documentary about a woman going around Australia. Can't remember what her name is. Anyway. She was talking about the fact that the biggest population of homeless people in Australia at the moment are over 55-year-old women, and that a lot of these women are, you know, making the best of it, but basically camping out in Australia for, you know, for their retirement because they don't have any money. So, so I'm sort of setting it in that world.
That sounds really different.
Yeah, and if you go north from Adelaide, you end up just in the desert, you know, and then the Wilpena Pound, there's this big crater. It's like Wolf Creek territory, you know, that scary movie with the serial killer. And you know, Serial Killer Central as well. So it's going to be vast desert.
Desert should give you a lot of options, I think.
Yeah, indeed.
Thank you so much for this evening.
Oh, thank you, Alex. That was lovely. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks everyone there. I hope I answered all your questions. Thanks so much for them, and good luck with your first novel. Just write, plan and write.